I'd planned a perfect 10-year anniversary dinner, but my husband arrived with a different kind of gift. A crisp white envelope containing an itemized bill for our entire marriage. The scent of roasted garlic and rosemary filled our small apartment, a deliberate callback to our first fancy date 10 years ago. I'd spent all afternoon cooking his favorite meal, coq au vin, letting it simmer until the chicken was fall-apart tender. The table was set with the good china we never used, 2 flickering candles casting a warm glow on the wine glasses I'd polished to a perfect shine. I'd even bought a new dress, a simple, deep blue silk that Mark had once said was my color. My heart was doing this stupid little fluttery thing it did whenever I tried to make things perfect for him. A hopeful, anxious beat against my ribs. 10 years, a whole decade. It felt monumental, a milestone that deserved every bit of effort. The key in the lock didn't sound like Mark. Usually it was a tired jangle, a clumsy fumble before the door swung open. Tonight it was a sharp, metallic click, devoid of the usual weariness. The door opened and he stood there, silhouetted for a moment against the hallway light. He wasn't holding flowers or a bottle of champagne. He was just holding his briefcase, his shoulders set in a way that felt more rigid than tired. "Mark, you're home," I said, my voice a little too bright. "Happy anniversary, my love." He stepped inside and closed the door, the click echoing the sound of the key. He didn't look at the table, didn't seem to notice the aroma of the food I'd slaved over. His eyes, which I had once compared to warm honey, looked flat and cold. He dropped his keys into the ceramic bowl by the door with a clatter that made me flinch. "Emily," he said. His voice was level, devoid of any emotion. It was the voice he used with difficult clients at his firm. I made coq au vin," I stammered, gesturing vaguely towards the kitchen, "and I opened that bottle of Bordeaux we were saving." He ignored me, walking past the table and setting his briefcase down on the sofa. He loosened his tie, not with the exhausted sigh of a man coming home, but with the sharp, efficient tug of a man preparing for a meeting. He turned to face me, and for the first time I noticed the thin, cruel line of his mouth. This wasn't the man I'd married. This was a stranger wearing his face. "Sit down," he said. It wasn't a request. I sank into one of the dining chairs, my silk dress suddenly feeling like a foolish costume. The candlelight flickered across his face, carving out sharp, unfamiliar angles. He reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a crisp, white envelope. My stomach plummeted. It was a business envelope, thick, official. He placed it on the table between us, pushing it slightly towards me. My eyes were locked on it. Was it a surprise? Tickets for a trip? The deed to a new house? My mind scrambled for a happy explanation, a reason for this bone-deep coldness that had invaded our anniversary. He didn't smile. He smirked. It was a twitch of the lips that held no warmth, only a kind of bitter triumph. And then he laughed. It wasn't a sound of joy or amusement. It was a short, sharp, barking sound that scraped against the silence of the room. It was the sound of a lock clicking open on a cage he was tired of looking at. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes boring into mine. "For our anniversary," he said, his voice laced with that chilling, mocking amusement. He tapped a finger on the white rectangle of paper. "You're free, Emily." My breath hitched. The words didn't make sense. Free? Free from what? I stared at him, then down at the envelope, my mind a swirling vortex of confusion and terror. "Mark, what is this? What are you talking about? This isn't funny." "Oh, I'm not being funny," he said, leaning back in his chair, the picture of calm. "I'm being incredibly generous. 10 years is a long sentence. I'm granting you parole for good behavior. My fingers, clumsy and numb, fumbled with the seal. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely tear the paper. This had to be a joke, a horribly cruel, twisted joke. Inside, I expected divorce papers. I steeled myself for the cold legal jargon that would officially end the life I knew. But it wasn't a legal filing. It wasn't a letter from a lawyer. It was a spreadsheet, neatly printed, formatted with cold, perfect lines and columns, spanning several pages. At the top, in a bold sans serif font, were 3 words that made the air leave my lungs. Invoice for services rendered. My eyes scanned down the page, my brain struggling to process the columns labeled item, hours estimated, and market value. The first line item, dated from the day after our wedding 10 years ago, read, meal preparation, 3,652 days at an estimated 1.5 hours day. Beside it was a staggering monetary figure. My gaze dropped to the next line. Housekeeping services. Then the next. Emotional support and counsel. Every single day of our life together, every act of love and partnership I had ever performed had been cataloged, quantified, and assigned a price. This wasn't a divorce. This was a bill. The paper was heavy, expensive stock, the kind his law firm used for important contracts. It felt cold in my trembling hands. I flipped to the second page, then the third. It was all there. Holiday planning and execution, gift procurement for extended family, wardrobe management and maintenance. There was even a line item titled Intimate Partner Duties, with an estimated time and a market value that made bile rise in my throat. He had broken down our entire life, our shared history, into a series of billable hours. The final page had a grand total, an astronomical figure that represented my supposed contribution to our 10-year marriage. What is this? I finally whispered, my voice a raw, broken thing. I looked up at him, searching for a flicker of the man I loved, a hint that this was some kind of elaborate, psychopathic prank. I found nothing. His face was a placid mask of indifference. It's an accounting, he said simply, as if explaining a quarterly report. I'm a numbers guy, Emily. You've always known that. For 10 years, I've been the sole financial provider. I've covered the mortgage, the bills, the car payments, the vacations, the clothes you wear, the food you eat. I felt it was only fair, as we part ways, to quantify your side of the ledger, to give you credit for your contributions. Credit? I choked out the word, a hysterical laugh bubbling in my chest. You think this is giving me credit? You've put a price tag on me comforting you when your mother died. You've billed for every meal I ever cooked, every time I ever loved you. The last words were barely audible. Don't be so emotional, he chided, waving a dismissive hand. This isn't about love. This is about fairness. A clean break. I thought you'd appreciate the transparency. Transparency? I slammed the papers down on the table, the sound making the candle flames dance wildly. This is monstrous, Mark. This is the most cruel, twisted thing I have ever seen. We built a life together, or I thought we did. Was this all it ever was to you? A business arrangement? Frankly, yes, he said, and the casual cruelty of it stole the air from my lungs. An arrangement where my investment was clear and documented, and yours was amorphous. So I fixed that. I ran the numbers. He reached into his briefcase again and pulled out a second identical-looking stack of papers, placing it neatly beside the first one. The header on this one read, Financial Contributions and Expenses. This, he said, tapping the new spreadsheet, is my side of the ledger. Everything I just mentioned. The house, the utilities, your weekly allowance, right down to the Netflix subscription, all calculated over 10 years, with a modest interest rate applied for inflation. I stared at the 2 piles of paper. My life's work on one side, his money on the other. It was a grotesque, lopsided scale, and I already knew which way it was going to tip. My heart hammered against my ribs, a trapped bird desperate for escape. This was his checkmate. This was the trap he had been setting for a decade. "So this is it?" I asked, my voice flat. "You're divorcing me and presenting me with a balance sheet?" He offered that same chilling smirk. "That's the beauty of it, Emily. It's so much cleaner than a divorce. Divorces are messy. Lawyers argue about assets, about what's fair, but numbers don't lie." He paused, letting the silence stretch, savoring the moment. "And according to the numbers, after we deduct all my financial contributions from the market value of your services, you see, there isn't much left." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "In fact, the total value of your services doesn't quite cover the cost of your upkeep." He flipped to the last page of his own spreadsheet and pointed to a single bolded, underlined number at the bottom. It was a negative figure. According to his cold, hard math, I didn't just have nothing. I owed him. "But," he said magnanimously, "it's our anniversary, so consider the debt cleared." He stood up, smoothing down the front of his suit jacket. The finality of the gesture sent a wave of ice through my veins. "I told you, you're free of any obligation." He walked over to the hallway and gestured toward our bedroom door. On the floor, just outside it, were my 2 largest suitcases, packed and zipped. "Your things are ready. I took the liberty to save you the trouble." I stared at the packed suitcases, then back at the man who was so calmly and clinically dismantling our life. The shock was beginning to recede, replaced by a cold, sharp-edged rage that was startlingly clear. He expected me to crumble. He wanted me to weep, to beg, to argue about the market value of my wifely duties. He had engineered this entire scenario to leave me stripped of dignity, a debtor grateful for his mercy. And in that moment, seeing the smug satisfaction on his face, I knew I wouldn't give him that. "You're right, Mark," I said. My voice was steady now, devoid of the tremor that had plagued it moments before. "Numbers don't lie." His smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. This wasn't the reaction he had anticipated. I picked up the invoice he'd prepared for me, the invoice for services rendered. My eyes scanned the columns again, but this time I wasn't looking at the cruelty. I was looking at the details. He was a numbers guy, a meticulous, detail-oriented lawyer. He wouldn't have made a mistake. He would have documented everything. I walked over to the bookshelf in the corner, my new silk dress rustling with a purpose it hadn't had before. I pulled out a thick, leather-bound photo album, one from the early years of our marriage. "You've been very thorough," I said, returning to the table and flipping it open, "but I think you've missed a few line items." I stopped at a photo of us, bright-eyed and smiling, standing in front of a dilapidated old house, holding a sold sign, our first home, a fixer-upper we'd bought for a song because it was all we could afford. "Do you remember this?" I asked, my voice conversational. "I do. I remember stripping the wallpaper in every single room myself. I remember sanding and staining every inch of these hardwood floors on my hands and knees because we couldn't afford to hire someone." I turned the page to a picture of me, covered in paint, laughing as I held up a roller. "I remember painting for 3 straight weeks. The fumes gave me migraines, but you said the quote for professionals was too high. I flipped through more pages. Pictures of me tiling the bathroom backsplash, laying sod in the barren backyard, assembling flat-pack furniture until my fingers were raw. You've listed housekeeping services, Mark. But this wasn't housekeeping. This was renovation, general contracting, project management. I looked from the photos to his meticulously crafted spreadsheet. And based on the market value for those professions, your estimate is insultingly low. I grabbed a pen from the cup by the phone. Let's see. General contractor services usually run about 10 to 20% of the total project cost. The value of this house increased by over $200,000 in the 5 years we lived there, largely due to these home improvements. So let's just add a conservative 15% of that to my invoice, shall we? I scribbled a new line item and a 6-figure number at the bottom of his spreadsheet. His face had gone pale. His mouth was a thin, tight line. And what about this? I continued, my voice gaining strength. I walked to his precious briefcase and pulled out the corporate prospectus for his law firm. I flipped to the back, to the partner profiles. It says here you graduated with honors, but it doesn't mention the person who typed every term paper, who proofread every brief, who made flashcards and quizzed you for weeks before the bar exam until she knew more about tort law than most first-year associates. I looked him dead in the eye. You've billed me for emotional support, but you seem to have forgotten academic and professional tutoring services. The going rate for a top-tier bar exam tutor is quite high, you know. Let's add that in. For, 200 hours? That seems fair. I added another substantial figure to the invoice. He was silent now, his rigid posture crumbling. The puppet master had lost control of his show. Oh, and one more thing, I said, my gaze falling on the invoice again. The biggest thing you missed. I tapped the header. Invoice for services rendered. This is a legally formatted document, Mark. You taught me that much. And a proper invoice requires certain information to be valid. I looked up at him, and for the first time I smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a woman who had just found the loophole. It requires the registered business number of the service provider. He stared at me blankly. You see, I explained calmly, for the past 8 years, I haven't just been a housewife. I've been running a small business from home, an online Etsy shop selling handcrafted jewelry, the one you always dismissed as my little hobby. I reached into my purse and pulled out my wallet, extracting a business card. Emily's Embellishments, LLC, fully registered, taxes filed every year. You should know, your accountant does them. I placed the card on the table. You have meticulously documented 10 years of my labor. You have assigned it a market value. You have presented it to me as a formal invoice. You've essentially created a 10-year record of contract work for my registered business. The only problem is, you never paid. I picked up the pen and crossed out his negative balance at the bottom of the page. After my additions, the number was now massively in my favor. So this isn't a settlement, Mark. It's an overdue invoice. And as a numbers guy, you know that unpaid corporate invoices accrue interest. Daily. I slid the amended spreadsheet back across the table to him. You're right. Numbers don't lie. I'll have my lawyer send you the official demand for payment in the morning. And don't worry. I paused, walking toward the door and my waiting suitcases. I won't charge you for this consultation. I picked up my bags, the weight of them feeling less like a burden and more like a beginning. I glanced back one last time at my husband, speechless and ashen-faced amidst the ruins of his perfect, calculated plan. You said I was free. You have no idea how right you were.